friends, and welcome to the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, also known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I may be an old dog, but I'm always trying to learn new tricks. In each episode of the SLLN Podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. As a good friend likes to say, we're better together. So I hope this podcast will help school librarians connect with and learn from each other. The opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. And because school librarians always strive to be good digital citizens, I cite sources when using material that is not my own. Without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Hey everybody, we're back and I am so excited. I've got my first international guest going up into the wilds of Canada, and we've got Christopher here with us. Christopher, I'm so excited you could be here. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and share. And this lesson sounds awesome. But before we get there, take a second, if you could, and tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're at. Lead us in.
All right. Yeah, sure. So my name is Christopher Hunt, and I'm a teacher librarian in today, sunny Chilliwack, BC, although we get our fair share of rain and whatnot here. So coastal British Columbia up in Canada. And I teach at a K-5 elementary school. So I'm a teacher librarian there. And I've been at this particular school for well over a decade, I think.
Wow.
I lose track of the years. And it's just a really fun job. I always say it's the best gig in teaching is being a teacher librarian, and
absolutely
lucky to have it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. You are also one of the best dressed librarians that I ever had the fortune to come across. So kudos to you on that as well.
That's like a side fun project. I mean, the funny thing is I'll post like librarian fashion stuff where I'm wearing my ties and my cardigans and stuff, playing on the stereotypes of librarians, but then half of the time I'm just wearing a t-shirt and jeans too. It's all right. How I feel on the day I wake up.
I love it. So how did you end up in school librarianship anyway? What was your path to the library?
So I started off, being a student in high school who had no idea what he wanted to do, really no idea. A vague sense because I really liked architecture that I might want to go that route, but I went to some pretty small, very small high school with a grad class of 20. So in my grade 10, 11, 12 years, we didn't even have a drafting course at the time. So I had no real skill in that area. And I remember I applied to BCIT, which is a tech college out here, for the architecture program. In the end, I didn't make it into that school. They had limited intake. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So I moved from Ontario out to BC. And so I moved out here, hadn't gotten into BCIT, which I'd applied to because we're moving here. And wasn't really broken up about it because it was reach into the grab bag and pull out a profession. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Within my first few months of going back to school, I had realized that I thought I would really like teaching and teaching English literature in particular, because that's my thing, reading. I went into the teaching program after I got a just general Bachelor of Arts degree. And it was when I did my first practicum in a school, I suddenly was like, wait a minute. Librarian. Teacher librarian. Why didn't I think about this? Why was there nothing in my coursework in education? So I stayed doing what they call here teacher on call, substitute teacher.
Oh, okay.
And so for 5 years, more or less, I just went every day to a different school, different grade. I opened myself up to go anywhere from kindergarten to grade 12, teaching any possible subject. And I was working on my teacher librarianship. And then starting to think about if I was going to be a librarian, what age level do I want to work with? And I knew I actually, from starting to do all this TOCing, I really loved working with the younger kids. And so I was like, okay, that's where all specialize. That's where I'll direct my focus as a teacher librarian, is I'll go way down from where I thought, like
Yeah, I
I'll
was
be
going
at
to say
grade
that
12.
is
And
opposite ends of the spectrum there.
yeah, it's just like their enthusiasm for reading and stuff, and just being, the teacher that can direct them to so many cool things, and
Yeah.
the idea of just being in charge of, ordering all this amazing literature. And so, yeah, that's the route I went.
You seem to have a real good time with your students, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, this lesson, Makey Bakey. I love this. I love the name. I love the idea.
Yeah.
So where did this idea come from? Like, how did this come to you?
I don't think I called it Makery Bakery back then, because like the makerspace term hadn't come around yet. But like, this was kind of an indirect route too, because one of the things, like, I used to work at a community school in what would be considered like an inner city catchment. There were all these community programs in the downstairs floor of our building, and one of them was, it was called Parent and Child Together, and it was community service people working with usually fairly young moms that just needed and wanted some more support. And so this program that was going on downstairs had things in it like, engaging in literacy with your children, and having that lap time, and spending that time developing their love of reading and working on their alphabet skills. So these things were going on in the basement level of our 3-story building, and I'm on the main floor in the library, and I'm thinking, why do our programs not get together? And
Yeah.
so I talked to this woman, Pam Offray, who ran the program down there, and she said, "Yeah, this is always bugging me too." And so we got together, and like, I wrote this whole grant, and I got 10% release time from my job to do this job that the district was
Nice.
then funding, and we would do all kinds of crazy cool projects like that. And I was known for doing that upstairs in the library too. We did baking, and so this is where the baking thing came in. At home, my wife and we bought this book called Artisan Bread in 5 Minutes a Day. Great book. And it's like, you just make this simple dough where you just put the water and the yeast and the salt and the flour, mix it all together, put it aside. That's it. There's no like kneading it, pounding it, rising it. It's a one shot thing. And we did that with the families and their toddlers. And then I went off to this other school that I teach at now, that I've been teaching at for a long time. And I just always had in my head, like, I miss the days of making bread. I still did all these other crazy projects, but I missed that. So I brought it back. Yeah.
I love it. I'm so glad that you did, because it's such a clever way to introduce so many interesting topics. I mean, it's really, really neat. So let's kind of dive into the lesson a little bit here. So like, if I'm a student and I'm coming into the library, what am I going to see as we're getting ready to start this lesson?
Yeah. So I guess, first of all, I do it with grade 2s in my school usually, because that hits their science curriculum around states of matter. So solid, liquid, and gas. But there's also a chunk in their curriculum here that is about changing states of matter with heat. So how that will change things. And so I pitched it at one teacher first and said, I used to do this thing with bread. And so we've got the liquids, we've got the solids, right? And then we heat it, and it changes from this blob to a real little dough. And wouldn't that be cool? And one teacher was so into it, and then everyone else wanted to do it after. So it's been this ongoing thing. But so when the kids come in, we've got these long rectangular tables. I've pushed most of them together into sets of 2 and put big tablecloths on them. So it looks a bit like a little cafe. And then there's sheets of parchment set out as like a workstation with a bowl for mixing and some spatulas. And there's bowls then in the center of the table with the flour, the salt, the yeast, and And so they come in, and it's like, whoa, the library is transformed into a bakery. Like, we're literally making food here, and please don't spill on the carpet.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just picturing a class of second graders and flour. And I'm imagining how many weeks it takes to clean that up. But it's got to be an amazing experience for the kids to come in and see the space transformed in that way. And I'm sure as this unrolls, are they coming in with like their science teacher specifically, or like the teacher that they work with?
So they'll come in with their regular grade 2 classroom teacher. So this is a real team teaching thing. And like a few of the teachers have made sure to like bring in an extra adult, even if we've got one that's available, like a parent.
Nice.
And so that's been really nice when we bring in some parents, because they're just blown away.
Oh yeah, I bet. And what a great piece of advocacy for your program that you're having parents come in and see, like, not the library is not just books, like we know it, but it's so hard sometimes for other people to wrap their minds around it. So the idea that you're bringing community in, and I'm sure they love getting to see their kids do this kind of stuff too.
Yeah, and then getting to hear the actual curriculum, like we're not just making bread, like we're doing science. It's like a science experiment, right? It's a lab, and that's really cool. And it's just a great way to teach some of that stuff in a way that I think will stick with them more. And even if they don't remember the science, because honestly, little kids sometimes don't remember all the super science, but they remember the event, that's for sure.
I love the connection that you're making too, like that explicit connection between cooking and science. Like this is chemistry. This is the like you said, changes in the states of matter. And I think too often we tend to separate all the subjects into these very discrete silos, and they don't always come together. And cooking always seems like the one that gets sort of pushed off to the side. So I love that real science connection there that you're bringing in.
Yeah, and I really love like anything that is hands-on helps kind of burn the knowledge into the brain, right? You have to talk about the importance of procedure, and a lot of them have done a little bit of baking with families, so they kind of understand the basic idea. Like you really have to go in order when you're cooking. Like so we talk a bit about like beforehand, like if we don't listen well enough here and we do something out of order, right? Or we leave something out, especially. How's this going to turn out, right? And they're all like, "Oh, well, not good," right? It's like, so like you really have to like look, listen, then do, right? And so it's very procedural. If you want things to work the way they're supposed to work, you can't not follow the directions in cooking. I always pour out all of the ingredients into little dishes so they can scoop them out with a measuring spoon. So there's the math, right, about cups and measuring spoons. We do a little bit of that in there too. But so when they first come in, they don't know what's in the dishes necessarily unless they've done a lot of bread baking. And so I get them to try to identify the things, and then we talk about what they are. And then, is this a solid? Is this a liquid? Is this a gas? Right? And because the solids we're using are things like yeast, and the salt is a little easier to tell because this recipe uses kosher salt. So it's like rock salt. So that's a little easier to see that those are actually solids. So then I'm like, so what's the flour of the 3 states of matter, right? And you can see them, like they start like, and I'm like, talk to your neighbors for a minute, right? They're trying to logic it out because they're like, well, it's pourable, right? And it's soft. So is it solid, right? And so and then we have to say, okay, what is flour? Like, what do we get flour from? Which then is a whole interesting discussion to see how much like they know. And so then there's always someone who knows, like, oh, wheat. Well, what's wheat? What's it look like? And then someone said, kind of like grass, right? And then we talk about how they make flour. So is flour a liquid, a solid, or gas then? And they're like, oh, it has to be a solid, right? So again, that scientific thinking kind of piece is in there.
Absolutely. And the more we can have them do that, I was literally just hearing somebody talk about how so often librarians and teachers tend to give the kids the information or point the kids to, like, here is the section that has the answer, rather than letting the kids kind of work it out on their own or track it down on their own. So I love that you're giving the second graders this opportunity to kind of just, let's see if we can work this out together. And I can absolutely see how flour would be confusing. Like,
oh, absolutely.
I love it. So they've got the pre-measured ingredients, and you talk about procedure. So
So I have a station set up at the front of the room, and I've got my projector screen down, and I actually always use my workbench. I have like a real like workbench with vices on either end, like a proper wood shop
nice.
workbench, but it's a kid size one. Like it's perfect. Anyways, the whole other thing. But I use that as my little station. So I put my tablecloth on it. And then I have my iPad. I've got a stand that has this really tall, like gooseneck thing. So I set it way above my station. So I'm using it as my document camera and beaming it onto
Gotcha.
the projector much larger behind me. So
Hmm.
then, so it's like a cooking show. Like it's really like a cooking show. Like there's a
How
camera
fun is
person
that?
there, like aimed down on my hands while I'm like, so then, yeah, I just say, okay, here's the recipe. So the first step, we need lukewarm water. So I'm often actually giving them those instructions on my headset while I'm running into the back office to run the hot water. 'Cause it has to be very lukewarm. If you've ever worked with yeast, if it's too hot, your bread's not going to work. If it's too cold, your bread's not going to work. So I have to do it while I'm kind of
It's got to
talking to
be
them.
just right. Got to get that
Yeah,
three
so
little
we talk
bears.
about that. Like, what is lukewarm? What does that mean? Right? And so, yeah. So then we talk about, okay, so once I have it, we're going to use, I can't remember the exact measurements, but it's all in my lesson plans there. It's 1 cup or 1.5 cups of like lukewarm water. So we adults will just run around quickly and they've got to make sure they get the right cup. We'll come and pour the water in and they dump that into their bowl. And then I'm like, okay, and now we need this much yeast, right? And so which one of the measuring spoons, right? And they got to make sure they get the right one. And what does TBSP mean versus what does TSP mean, right? What,
Hmm.
and so we do all of that as we go. So I do that first step where we mix the yeast and the salt and the water. And then I say, now you guys do it. Right. I've pre-poured things into small bowls, but they have to actually measure out everything.
Hmm.
And and then it's like that step is ready. And then we talk about adding the flour. And I show them a little trick of like leveling the flour with a knife across the top and
Nice.
right, and how it doesn't. Is it going to work if I do it with the butter side, the serrated side? Like, is that a good full cup, right? And they're like, no, serrate, right. So it really matters. You got to use the back, right? And just little
There's
tricks, and
Yeah,
it's
there's
really
so
fun.
many great little like
Yeah.
learning moments that are embedded in this that I can see, especially second graders, but like even older kids, maybe not
Oh yeah.
having that sort of procedural knowledge or, background experience in some of these things that we might take for granted as adults, like tablespoon versus teaspoon.
Yeah.
It seems like a very simple thing when you know it, but when you don't know it, that's
It's
fun.
great once they've got like everything mixed up. I have these old atlases that I keep around essentially for this project, and we just put an atlas on the top of the bowl to let the dough rest. Like you could just put a cloth, but then I have to go buy a whole bunch of tea towels, and they'd probably get all floury, so I have to wash them. So I use these old atlases. But
That's
yeah,
awesome that they're
so
getting used.
we let it rest, and ideally, you'd let this dough rest for like an hour. Longer would be even better, but like an hour, it'll double, which is
Okay.
ideally what you want. But we don't have that kind of time usually. Like I'm kind of cramming this into one of my longer sections for team teaching, which should be like an hour and a bit. And then we
Okay.
always do it in that team teaching block that runs into lunch so that I can be baking it during lunch.
Ah,
Um, but
that
yeah,
was going to
but
be my
we've
next
got to let the
question.
dough rest for at least 20 minutes so the atlases go on top, and then that's a whole other thing again, right? When we lift them off later, there's moisture on the atlas from the just subtle amount of heat, right? And then we're like, well, how can there be moisture on there? Like, what's going on? Right? And someone eventually figures out, wait, would that be a gas? Right? It's like, yes, like the yeast is releasing gas, like it's puffing up, right? Once we've got that, then they always divide the dough that we've made in half, and then they're each going to make a little mini loaf. So I show them how they can roll their loaf in different ways. So basically, if you think about it like a Kaiser bun, is like the way I've set up the recipe and the lesson plans I've shared is that
Okay.
it's enough for 2 kids when they split their dough in half, because I always have them work in pairs, and they've each got enough that when it comes out of the oven, it'll be like a little Kaiser bun, or or they can shape it more hot dog bun shaped. So yeah,
That's fun. And are you able to, where do you bake them?
yeah, great question. Because that I don't have in the library. I don't have the
I was going to
ovens in the
say.
library. But there's, at least in elementary schools, there's always a few ovens around. Like there's one in the staff room, so I use that one. And then our schools here have like a kindergarten sort of cooking program. Like,
Nice.
yeah, as long as you've got at least one oven, you can do all right. You might have to do them in a couple batches, but
Yeah, kind of cycle them through.
yeah,
I could see that.
yeah.
Cool. So then they get cooked up, and then I'm imagining the kids probably at this point have gone back to class, or do they come back like toward the end of the
Yeah,
day to grab their
so
bread?
yeah, by the time we're done, it's usually like running into the lunch break. And so, yeah, they go off and they eat their lunch and they go out and they play while I take them and put them in the oven. And
They go off and have fun while you do all the work.
yeah, they need about like 35 minutes or so to bake up nicely. And I do this other thing too. I forgot that like when we need the dough to rest for at least 20 minutes, you need to occupy them. Now I'm in the lab, I could just gather them over at the carpet and read them a story. But I always think, well, we might as well do the classic making butter so that we've got butter to go with our bread. And that's often a thing that teachers have done with a class where they just take like heavy cream, like whipping cream, put it in a jar and shake it. I don't know if you know that. Probably.
I remember doing that back in probably second or third grade. Yeah.
And that's a really cool thing. So I just have several different jars for the different table stations and fill them up about halfway with cream. And I always add a little salt to them. And
that's a great way to do another phase change too. Like we're going from dough to baked bread. We're going from liquid to solid-ish.
Yeah. And then that's the thing. And then it just reinforces it. And I love to then say, what is cream? Like, where does cream come from? Right? It's like thick milk. It's like, well, you're getting close, but like, and usually they don't know that at all. So that's like news to them. And and then the idea that we're going to take this liquid and now turn it into a solid, into butter, just like the butter you buy at the store. Like,
yeah.
And all that is just shake and shake and shake and shake and shake until it doesn't shake anymore. And then you normally just pour off a little bit of sort of watery liquid and you've got butter. So, yeah, so they do that while the bread is rising. And then we talk about how to shape it into a loaf. And I always get them to make it look like, I always say it now, you've got artisanal bread, right? Like I teach them how you just like drag a knife across the top to make the little designs you see. So I'm like, when you go to certain stores where they have the fancy bread, this is all it is. It's just the normal bread with little slice marks in it.
Working in some vocabulary. This is great. Hitting all the areas.
Now when you go home, you can tell your parents, look at the artisanal bread I made.
That's right. Can start your own little stands, kids.
Yeah.
That's
it's
awesome.
Just the most fun. One thing people are always sort of, I think, afraid to do it. So people always ask me one of the first things like, oh my God, it must make a disaster in the library. And I'm like, I mean, it might help that I'm like an OCD-ish kind of person, like a lot of library types are. I mean, even though I'm doing this wildly bizarro thing. But like, everything I'm doing, I'm demoing. And I'm like, am I getting flour all over myself? Like, no, I'm not, right? So why am I not? Because I'm doing everything over the bowls. And I'm like, should I pour the water over here off to the side? Like, why would I do that? There's always a chance of spilling, and I've got to move it this far, right? Like, so hold the cup over the bowl, pour the water in, dump it down low. If I pour from up here, what's going to happen, right? So I just do that as we go with everything. And we rarely have anything but a mess on the tablecloth. That's not too bad. A bit of extra flour and stuff that we can easily wipe.
I mean, like you said, if you show them, like, here's how you do it. And that's another great embedded lesson in this, that they're getting this, like, let's be thoughtful about how we're doing this instead of just being crazy Looney Tunes and just everything everywhere. That's man, there's so many neat little things just buried in this as it goes along that are so profound, and yet we kind of take some of them for granted. So that's, I really like that. I really like that a lot. Man, what a great lesson this is. So other than kind of making sure you're showing the kids some basics, like here's how we want to do this as we do it, are there any other main things that people might want to bear in mind if they're doing this for the first time?
Yeah, like the main thing is like getting the supplies and stuff set up, like having a bit of a fund to do that. So I'm lucky that because there's the K Kitchen program for the kindergarten classes, like they had a bunch of bowls and stuff already. But then I'll just go to our parent advisory committee, which what, I think in the USA, what do they call that? PTA?
Yep, the
Yeah.
Parent Teacher Association.
Yeah. And so here it's parent advisory committee or council. And so sometimes I've pitched things to them. And sometimes through their fundraising, they've been able to help me out. So that's like another avenue to get things like that instead of pulling it out of your library budget, especially if you have a sadder, paltry budget. Yeah.
I love it. This is such a fun lesson, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. We are going to take a 90-degree turn. We're going to head into our break.
Book break. Squiggly.
Oh, cool.
This is, I mean, I love the lessons, but I also love the books because I'm a book nerd like we all are. So what would be a title that you want people to know about? It can be personal, professional, kids, adults, whatever. Just a book that you think is awesome that people should check out.
So it's called The Mona Lisa Vanishes. It was just published in the last year or so. It's a book that's kind of like it works as kid lit and middle grade lit, and I would say works well into middle school and high school. It's just like got some real crossover appeal.
Nice.
It's a book that just talks all about the rise of Leonardo da Vinci and the painting of the Mona Lisa, and then really focuses on the theft of the Mona Lisa in 1911, which really is the thing that actually catapulted the Mona Lisa into actual fame. And it was just so well written, so engaging. It jumps back and forth in time, like going back to like the Renaissance and then jumping into like contemporary 1911 stuff. And yeah, it was just so engagingly written.
I don't know when I learned, but only fairly recently learned about the Mona Lisa being stolen and that being the thing that, like, before that, nobody really knew about it. Nobody really cared about it. And then all of a sudden it was this world famous painting and everybody had to see it because
Exactly.
It was stolen. It's like, that's a really interesting way to gain your fame. But
yeah. And there's like I often do these posts that I call them hat trick lit, which I haven't made the one for this book because I just finished it last week. But there's 3 picture books, like sort of narrative, nonfiction picture book blends about this topic. So I've read them before, but this one being more like a novel, a nonfiction novel, because it reads way more like a novel than a traditional nonfiction book. It's set up like that. Its stream size looks like that.
Nice.
It just dove into so many different things that I hadn't read in these other books before. And one of the like just fascinating things was the Louvre at the time, in 1911 when this painting gets stolen. There was no real security. Like, they had guards who just kind of wandered around, but then no one thought anyone was going to steal anything. The only people that went into the art galleries were the really rich leisure class or artists who came to study the works and like sketch them and draw them. And so like they were just there with no protection, no guarding, like statues on plinths with no like glass box around them or anything. And so there's all these little just cool details about what life was like and how easy it was to steal. And there's like some side plots about a guy who did go in and actually just walk out with some old statues like little like busts. And and no one even would notice and stuff like that. And the Mona Lisa
Boy.
was gone for a day or two before anyone actually noticed. And I'd always wondered about that before. And then part of the reason nobody noticed was because there was this whole movement at the time, because photography was still quite new, and they were making a photographic record of the entire collection of the Louvre. But one of the things they talked about in there was the photography department would just show up randomly to a gallery within this massive Louvre museum and just like take a painting off the wall and take it off to photograph. And they wouldn't tell anyone. They were their own department doing their own thing. And so people would just see something wasn't there and they just see, oh, the photographers have got it, right? And then it would come back in a day. And so that was added to why they also didn't notice that the painting had gone. And yeah. And talking about how the painting was famous, but in such a niche way up until its theft, because it was like respected as this amazing piece of art in that it has like no brush strokes. And so people in the more arts community revered it. But other than that, nobody really knew about the painting. And it's almost hard to think of a time when nobody knew about this painting, because it's ubiquitous and like one of the most parodied and modified works of art ever. So
yeah. Oh,
the whole book was absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
That's definitely got to go on my, I keep putting more books on my TBR list. So I'm at like book 400 now, but this is definitely going on there too. Well, Christopher, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you taking the time. And especially, knowing that we've got a bit of a time difference between us, that you were, had a long day and then you came back and shared with us. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was so fun. This first
awesome.
time for me. So, hey, cool.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the SLLN Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes, which include not only a link to the lesson, but also links to the SLLN website, home to a curated list of free upcoming virtual events and resources for school librarians. It's easy to become a member of the network. Just visit the site and use what you like. If you have an idea, a question, or a lesson you want to share, you can email schoolliblearning@gmail.com. That's school, L-I-B, learning@gmail.com. Know someone with a great school library lesson? Let us know. Until next time, be safe, be good, and be well.